wandering round the Hope Quilters exhibition with Sylvia Critcher, I was reminded when we looked at her crazy quilts, which she called syncopated crazy, I think, of an old technique that I used to do, which was called stack the deck. And we have a crazy template that Jenny has demonstrated, and I put the two together and I've come up with the quilt behind me. There's also a variation for the quilt in front of me, which has a more quilt as you go technique. So we're going to do this one in two parts. We're going to do the blocks, which I'm going to show you how to do. And then if you want to come back on another occasion and make them as a quilt as you go quilt, which is the purple one in front of me, where we put the back on, we quilt the front really simply, and then we add the sashing, then obviously you'll be ready to go when we do part two. But let's look at the crazy blocks themselves. It's a very economical use of your fabrics. I've chosen 5 fat quarters, and if you're going to do, and obviously you need a border for the one behind me, so we're going to make 20 blocks. And if we're going to do the part 2, which is quilt as you go, I've got 2 other fabrics which I've chosen here for the outer, for the border and for the sashing. I have layered the fat quarters up on the ironing board and given them a press. The reason for that is we are going to show you today how to cut through all the layers. One of the beauties of the rotary cutter, which seems to have got a little bit lost, is that it cuts everything simultaneously exactly the same size, and this is a brilliant technique to show you. As I said, I've layered these up on the ironing board. They're fat quarters. They do vary a little bit in size, but that's fine too. And by ironing them together, they've got a little bit of adhesion. I've given myself a straight edge on this end and turned my fabric round so that I'm safe. What I've done now is measure, what I need to do now is measure what can I get. We need 4 squares out of here, so basically 2 strips of fabric. And the smallest piece of fabric measures 19.5 inches. Now, having done my maths earlier, we worked out that that's 9 3/4 to get down here. So I've got a 6-inch ruler, which means that with my square ruler, I can cut 3, and I can lay this up to be 3 3/4 here. If I put my ruler here, that gives me a 9 3/4 inch strip. And I'm going to cut all the way through all 5 fabrics. Just move that, just explode that a little bit, and I can do exactly the same with this. So 3 3/4 and 6 inches. Big relief all round. I do actually get through all the fabrics. So use the smallest piece of fabric on the top to be your guide. If you've got fat quarter yards, they won't be as long because they're technically 18 inches, but you need to be able to get 4 squares out of it. So whatever measurement is yours is yours. So I'm just going to put that aside. Now I can use my square ruler. Carefully just move these. And I'm going to cut these into 2 9 3/4 inch squares. So put my ruler down here. I need to be able to get it. This, of course, is much wider. This is going to be 22 inches because it's half the width of the fabric. So I can put my square ruler on here. There's 9 3/4. I can bring this right up here. Don't want to waste anything. Turn it round. 9 3/4. Spare fabric, and keep those like that all together. You'll see that I've kept the fabrics all piled one above the other. We need to do that. Spare fabric, and we're going to do exactly the same with this. So 9 3/4 is here. I don't tend to say it very much these days because it's just so automatic for me. But when you finish cutting, you close the blade on your rotary cutter. Of course, if you've got one of those modern ones, just by letting go your grip, it will do that for you. It is, you do need to stay safe. Hold this square ruler nice and firm. Okay, so we've got 4 piles of 5 fabrics. And I forgot to show you the fabrics that I've chosen. I've got 2 green ones, that one, and that one. So there we are, those are those 5. The next thing we're going to do is we are, from a piece of paper, which I have stuck together, we are going to draw ourselves a square that is exactly the same size as the one we've just cut. So I can again use the edge of the paper to be my square. 9 3/4. And now what we're going to do is we are going to draw our crazy design on it. I think it's easier to do it on paper the first time, because then you understand where you're heading for. You're asked, well, I'm going to ask you to cut a 5-sided figure or draw a 5-sided figure in the middle. If you can do that with a little piece of paper, that's fine. I'm useless. So I happen to have this Simply Crazy template. I'm going to use this. I'm going to place it somewhere on that 9 3/4 inch square, and I'm going to draw the top 2 lines in. Now I could go all the way around, but just to show you how to use the template effectively, I'm going to move this up to be slightly smaller than the full size of the plastic. So I've moved the edge that I've drawn, that drawn line is now underneath this first line here, which means that I can draw the other 3 sides. The nice thing about this, it's not overly precise, so it's really nice to do. Now we're going to take a ruler, any old ruler will do, and we are going to draw the lines that we're going to cut. And we're going to draw lines that go around this crazy shape. So taking this side first, I'm just going to draw from here, draw it properly, from here to here. That's 1. We're going to draw from here to here. These drawn lines will represent your cut lines. So I'm just going to go round the template. 3, 4, and this will be 5. Now it's a bit like a jigsaw. Some of you will be good at jigsaws and some of you won't. So I'm just going to, for ease for demonstration, I'm going to mark in what I call the outside edges. You can mark these however you like, and this is my center. So we've got numbers and we've got an outside edge. I don't seem to have any scissors, so I'm going to very quickly just do this and get my square. So this now is exactly the same size as this. So we're going to put that down on here. I'm just going to put that over here so I can place my cut pieces on it. So we're going to go round. Number 1, I'm going to cut up this edge here. So, and I'm going to rebuild this square onto this little mat here so you can see what's happening. So that goes here. This goes here. Remember, keep yourself safe. These are the outside edges. Oops, I forgot a step. I forgot to tell you that you can, with these nice flat pins, pop that in there and it won't destroy your cutting. There we go, so here we go. And this cut, remember those were the edges. So that's here and that's there. That's my outside edge. This is my outside edge, so that must go in here like that. And there's my center, which we must go in there like that. So let's take that pin out. So you can keep these for later and use them exactly as they are, or I'll show you, we can come back to those and we can use them a little bit differently. Okay, so here is the layers all cut, and we're going to sew them together. We're going to sew them though so that each plate represents a block. Now obviously we don't want all similar fabric, so we've got to shuffle them. So just let me explode this a little bit so you can see the easy shuffling. We've got 6 pieces, but only 5 fabrics. So 2 of the fabrics on each of the blocks will be repeated, 2 of the shapes. So I think I'm going to go for these 2. They're sort of roughly the same size without being overly dominant. So I'm going to forget about those 2, and I'm going to take 1 fabric off the top here and pop it underneath. We're going to work with these 3 now. Let's take 2 off this one. 3 off this one. 1, 2, 3. And 4 off this one, which means the bottom one comes up to the top. There you go. So that layer is a block. And I'm going to show you very quickly how to sew that. So if I bring that down here, that one comes here, that one comes here. You do have to be systematic about this, but it isn't difficult. You check that you've got 5 fabrics, 2 repeats, and so on. So there we go. That's block 1, and you can see block 2 is already emerging here. I'm not going to bore you with all the sewing, but I am going to show you how to sew 1 block, because you are going to lose, the whole thing is going to shrink. So this is the first, and you're going to sew them in reverse order. So number 1 becomes the last piece you sew on. If you get confused, the first piece that you sew onto the center is the only piece that matches in size. All the others go much longer, and we don't do inset seams in patchwork if we can avoid it. So right sides together, we're going to sew down here with our regular seam allowance. You could make it smaller if you wanted. Just be consistent. Let me just have needle down because I prefer that. A little thread saver, which I wouldn't do without. And so there we go. So that goes back in here. I'm going to finger press that open, and this one now goes on here. You're going to match up the inside edge all the time, and this will just explode down. But having said that, because it's a point on a plain side, it will actually extend a little bit. So just pop a pin in there just to hold it while I transfer it, and I'm going to sew down here. Oops, got my thread saver caught. More haste, less speed. Pop it back, finger press it open. Obviously, if you were at home and you've got a nice little ironing station, that would be perfect. So we're now going to match this one up here. Can extend just a little bit by about 1/4 inch up here. Those of you who do a lot of patchwork will know that, those ears are very common in patchwork. Okay. And you can see how jagged the outside edge is, but that doesn't matter. This is nice and straight. So this is the edge I'm worried about now. It doesn't, if that extends a little bit, that's absolutely fine. It doesn't matter. You're just going to get a straight seam. Don't wave the seam though, just be nice and straight. Okay, and last but not least, this one, I'll go back to the same orientation. That one obviously goes across there. And you can see we are going to lose a little bit here, but that's absolutely fine. You can trim it off afterwards if you like, but I like to sew first and trim it off afterwards. So there you have it, block number 1. And I would work my way down through these in exactly the same way. When they're all done, you can work on the next set. Let me just pop those here for the minute. Now you can use exactly the same pieces if you want. You can just build them on top. You can certainly use the same center. And if you feel confident, you could just place it. Put a pin in. Put a pin in here. And take your rotary cutter and work your way around. If you're not confident, go back to your paper piecing and put them all on here. The other thing you can do is to make yourself another template that is actually smaller. And this is one, again, that I did. You can make that smaller simply by folding, slicing a bit off, any of the sizes, and then putting those down, but using exactly the same formula. So I had 2 that were slightly different, but used the same size center, 2 piles of 5, so that's 10 blocks. And then the other 10 blocks, different size center, again, placing the second 5 so that all 10 were slightly different. When you've made them all, you give them a good press and you trim them back. And you trim them back to be uniform. Now, I can't tell you what to trim them back to because I don't know what you started with. But looking at my block here, I would like to think I could get 8.5. So if you're going to trim fabric off, you can look underneath your ruler and see where you can trim. My 8.5 brings me to here. This is my smallest piece, so I would probably want to cut the least off that. We've got big pieces at the bottom here. So on this one, I would come up and away and across to give myself 2 nice neat edges, turn the whole thing round, put the 8.5 on the 2 edges I have just cut, and then I'm going to trim up here, across and away and across here. And there's my Stack the Deck Crazy block 1. You make 20 for the quilt behind me. You just put them together in whatever order you like. They're beautifully, you've got no seams to match. You've beautifully sized them with your rotary cutter and the ruler. Put a simple border on and there's your quilt. If you want to do them as the quilt as you go method, then wait for part 2. But I hope you've had fun.